Folks, many of you all know that yesterday was International Women's Day, right?
Hmm.
I'll bet that not many of you all know that today is International Barbie Day. So I chose this theme because I really appreciated that movie. And I'm going to show you how this movie fits in with today's theme. Are you all ready? I hope so. I hope so, because this is going to be a lot of fun. We're navigating difficult conversations with grace and impact, and we are going to be inspired by the Barbie movie because think about it. She had difficult conversations throughout that movie. Um, One of my favorite songs is from the movie. It's Billie Eilish's "What Was I Made For?" Right? What how many times have we asked ourselves that question, not in the sense of, "Hi, I'm a plastic doll. What was I made for?" But we can all resonate with that question, right? And we can all see glimmers of that question in other people, especially when we have difficult conversations. And the reason why is because a lot of times our difficult conversations come from establishing positions, right? I'm right, you're wrong. Let me change your mind about what you're talking about. And difficult conversations shouldn't do that. Difficult conversations should aim for understanding rather than changing someone's mind because my favorite philosopher is Stephen Covey, and I'm going to use two of his quotes throughout our time together today. And of course, the first one is going to come directly from his Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, in that we seek first to understand, then to be understood. Because if I don't know where you're coming from, I don't know where we're going together in this conversation. Does that make sense? The second tenet is to connect first, then share your perspective. How many times have you had someone come up to you and offer unsolicited advice, right? That's usually the start of many difficult conversations, in my opinion. Um, Thanks for telling me something I really didn't want to hear because I don't know who you are. Connect first and then share your perspective. What I hope we walk away with by the end of our time together is an awareness of the impact of political polarization. I could bore you to death with my personal stance that it's a national security threat because it allows us to be vulnerable to social media influences by bad actors, but that's another time and another conversation. What I really want is for us to start with a foundation so that we become experienced in skill building. And it indeed is going to be abbreviated today. Hey, so our first step in having a difficult conversation is going to be the first of 5 steps. This step is acknowledging the other person. There was a quote in the slideshow that said, "I see you not pretending to see me, not pretending to see you, because we're going to have an awkward conversation if we actually see each other." Yeah, yeah. That's why we look at our feet when we're walking down the street, and we use our phones as shields. Um, because if I acknowledge someone, then I'm gonna probably have to talk to them, right? And if this is gonna be a difficult conversation, we have to acknowledge the other person. There is my favorite African word is sawubona. It is I see you for all the inherent worth that you are. Sawubona is my favorite word. And in this first of 5 steps of acknowledge, this is what we're doing. We're letting the other person know that I see you. I see you. And in this quote, if you remember where it comes in the movie, it's when America Ferrera is looking at Margot Robbie's character right before she gives that amazing 2 minute and 33-second speech on what it's like to be a woman. Your second step in the 5-step process of having a difficult conversation is finding agreement, because that's where you start to connect. That's where you don't have to agree that an election was rigged or stolen. You don't have to agree that the contentious things of a conversation, what you can agree on is something deeper. Apparently, we're both passionate about this issue, right? Finding common ground is essential to difficult conversations. In Hinduism, it is taught that the world is one family, and that idea reminds us that beneath our differences lies a shared humanity that we should acknowledge and agree upon, right? When you're in conflict, ask yourself, what connects me to that person? What can I figure out that makes us on the same team? That's an important thing to do, and a very important second step in the 5-step process of having a difficult conversation. The third step is to ask. It is to ask. I'm going to go back to that Stephen Covey quote of his 7 habits. It is to seek first to understand, and I can't understand anything about you unless I ask, right? If I don't ask, then I'm just assuming. I'm making a lot of assumptions. And if anybody is a Saturday Night Live fan from the 80s and remembers what Eddie Murphy says about assuming, that is something you don't want to do, especially in a difficult conversation. Asking is essentially saying, "Can you help me understand you? Can you help me understand your stance in this conversation?" In Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad emphasized the importance of gentleness and listening, saying that the strong person is not the one who overcomes others by force, but the one who controls themselves in anger. So asking questions opens up the pathway to dialogue and disarms tension. I'm going to throw in the Dalai Lama, who encourages us to approach every conversation as a listener and as a learner. When you talk, you are only repeating what you already know, but if you listen, you may learn something new. And it's been my experience that is true. And I hope it's been your experience too. That fourth step, that most important step after we have acknowledged the other person, after we have found points of commonality, of agreement, and after we've asked for understanding, Now we can give a piece of ourselves to them. We can share our perspective in a non confrontational way. We can share our perspective. So we've acknowledged, we've agreed, we've asked, and now we are perspective sharing. Here's how I see it, because I now understand how you see this situation. You should feel comfortable at this point to allow me to share how I feel. I see it now. From a secular lens, Brene Brown reminds us that vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and to be seen when we have no control over the outcome. We may have a perception of how we want this conversation to go, how we want this conversation to eventually end, but we have no control over the other person, now do we? So when that happens, perspective sharing is an amazing time to be vulnerable. There was another slide in our slideshow that talked about vulnerability is power. And indeed it is. It really is. It really is. I want to do a brief recap. If you notice, it's AAA PC. So just keep those in mind. That when you acknowledge, when you agree, when you ask, you are inviting the other person into your sacred space. You're creating a conversational sanctuary, so to speak, so that other person can be vulnerable. And when they are, then they're open to your perspective. And in closing, all you simply have to do is make sure that the conversation ends on a good note, right? Clear up all the animosity, strip away all the tension, and just make sure that this is either a conversation that can be revisited without rancor, or B, your relationship with the person that you're having a difficult conversation with is as strong, if not stronger, than it was when you walked into that conversation. I hope all of that made sense. This slide is not supposed to. I just wanted to show where Barbie ranked when it had its domestic opening. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much, everyone, for allowing me to share a little bit of what I teach as a member of Braver Angels.